Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. In this video today, I want to talk about how Jews are not told to forget their history when it comes to the Holocaust. Therefore, why should we forget our history when it comes to slavery? Now, I am not in this video going to compare the two events in terms of apples to apples, in terms of what was worse, what was better, the length, how many people were involved, people who died, because that is not fair. This event for both groups are very emotive, and I respect that. Therefore, this video is not going to be about that, just as a heads up. But what I do want to talk about is whenever the topic of racism, slavery, and oppression comes up when it comes to black people, the common phrase you would always hear is, oh, that was a long time ago. You should forget about it. Stop using it as a crutch. Move on. We're now in the present. Now, what strikes me with that is, while the word's in isolation, you're thinking, that is true. But also you're thinking, that kind of doesn't really make sense because we have moved on as a people in terms of how we live today. We live today according to the values and principles and ethics of the present time that it takes us to do. A lot of us work in white-collar jobs, blue-collar jobs. We're working individual, tax-paying individuals. We're entrepreneurs. A lot of us have made it to, if we're in the lower class, the middle class, from the middle class to even higher on, and a lot of people, black people, are millionaires in various different industries. So the idea of moving on always seems to be an interesting response to this situation. But here's when we decode it, what they really mean. What they really mean is you should stop talking about it and stop referring to it, full stop. But this is where I got to ask the question, why should we? Because when we look at the Jews and the Holocaust, do we ever tell them just to forget about it and move on? Do we ever tell them not to flood the airways with their media, documentaries, with their films? Now, people will automatically say this is different because Jews don't use this today as a means to be victims, and they don't pull out any cards when it comes to oppression. But we only have to look at recent events and call out that bullshit right now and debunk that myth. Because if we go to the Labour Party under the Jeremy Corbyn, there were consistent complaints. He was dogged rumours about being anti-Semite, and his party rifed under anti-Semitism, to the point where, guess what? A full investigation was ordered and people were expelled, reprimanded. Why? Because the Jews understood exactly what anti-Semitism, similar to the vein of racism, can lead to, based on what? The history of something that they do not forget. And by the way, all of this is rightly so. I support the Jews in their approach to taking this seriously, because in light of their history, in light of what took place, even though when you consider that this generation of Jews didn't go through that, this generation of Jews, some of them, depending on where their line and their lineage goes to, they didn't actually even experience the Holocaust because they wouldn't have been in Germany or Poland or the neighboring countries when the situation happened. But that's not the point. Jews as a collective understand exactly the importance of being together when it comes to fighting anti-Semitism. And again, they're rightly so in doing so. And I support that. Any acts of what they perceive to be anti-Semitism, or if you are anti-Semite, is met with full force, investigation, and a demand for action, which is the key thing, action. The same thing happened with Wiley. Based on what Wiley did, all his social media accounts have been banned. He was exiled from he was part of the ways from his record company, his manager, etc., etc. And again, like I said, rightly so. If that was the case, and judging by the tweets, what we saw, he should have been banned. Now, we could argue about the length of being banned, because I think he's been banned for life, but action should have been taken. But when we compare this to when people are racist towards black people, what happens to those people? What kind of actions are met? Sometimes it's a slap on the wrist. Sometimes it's nothing, especially when you look at Twitter. I mean, do we even need to talk about how Muslims react if you depict their God in a different way? So sometimes it's always interesting, the levels of verbiage that come across when we talk about different people's histories and different people's oppression, and how when it comes to Jews, again, particularly, they're never told to forget, but black people are always told you must forget about it. But that's why I say black people must never forget about slavery. Now, the images that I've been scrolling on the screen, this kind of confirms the point that I've been talking about, how if you look at the number of films and documentaries that have been produced since the Holocaust has happened, since the 1940s, if you look at the list, scrolling down on the screen right now, throughout the decades, how many extensive lists of films. You also got documentaries, short films, and I'm not even discussed the articles that keep getting written every single year, all the things that we uncover about this atrocity that took place. And again, rightly so. But why do they do it? Why is it so important that they must, or should I say the Jews must continually hammer home the message about what happened? Because again, they know the importance of remembering history. They understand the importance of certain pivotal moments in life should never be forgotten. It's a part of their history that they tell so many times. And again, each time it's told, it's always met with the same reverence in the exact same light as the first time it was told. But again, whenever it comes to slavery and slavery films and all things of that nature, it's always, oh, here we go again. No more slave stories, no more slave films, no more about oppression. We're more than oppression. And again, on the face of it, you're 100% right. We are more than that. Sometimes you're like, we don't want to hear more slave movies or slave stories. But again, it's important that every culture, every ethnic group remembers certain key moments in their history, even if it's not the only thing in history that they've achieved. But certain cultures, there's certain pivotal moments that are never forgotten, that they always pass on down to their children. And again, this is something that we should never forget. And here's another thing, what always amazes me when we talk about slavery, is for the most part, people only believe slavery existed in the US during the transatlantic slave trade. When, if you actually do the research, you'd realize that the least amount of slaves actually went to the US, and the most amount of slaves during that period went to the Caribbean, Latin America, as it's called today, and South America. Yeah, how many films or information do we ever hear about slavery that happened in the Caribbean, or slavery that happened in Latin America, or South America for that reason? We never hear about what their story's like. What were they picking? I mean, they wasn't picking cotton, that's for sure. They were picking sugar, molasses, rum, etc., etc. But do we hear about that as often? Nope. So when it comes to slavery, what amazes me is how, truth be told, while this seems to be a topic that people think we talk about all the time, we actually don't talk about it nearly enough for people to understand exactly what took place. So, what am I saying in all of this? I'm saying we as a people should never forget. We must learn from it, not use it as a crutch, but use it as a means to propel us into higher success, but ultimately never forget our history. Thanks for listening. Until next time.